Week 14 has arrived. We are charging towards the playoffs. In looking over this week's slate of games, a few caught my eye. I'd like to talk about them now quickly. Of course, we'll cover every game here on BETDAQ NFL over the next few days, so we hope you check back with us. But let's talk about a few of these now, shall we? Starting with the Thursday night game, the Houston Texans traveling to Jacksonville to face their division rival Jaguars. Houston, a 2.5-point favorite on BETDAQ. 43 is the total in this game. That's right, the Texans are a favorite despite losing 10 straight games, including a loss just 2 weeks ago to these very same Jacksonville Jaguars. That game, of course, was in Houston. The Texans were a double-digit favorite, but lost outright. The Jacksonville Jaguars winning that game 13-6. And then Jacksonville turned around and won again last week, winning on the road in Cleveland 32-28. The Jags have now won 3 of their last 4 games after losing their first 8 games. Each of those losses came by double digits. Remember, through 8 games, we were talking about the Jags as potentially the worst team in NFL history, and now they've won 3 of 4. Gus Bradley has turned it around. You know, Gus has been preaching positivity all season, and that was quite frankly laughable through 6 or 7 weeks. But now look at it. The players seem to have bought in. The Jacksonville Jaguars have more going for them than any 3-9 team that I can remember. And the Houston Texans, they're moving in the other direction. It looks like Gary Kubiak might be fired at the end of this season. The guy who's currently playing quarterback, Case Keenum, he might never make another start in the NFL after the end of this season. At least that's what I think, based on games I saw him play against Oakland and Jacksonville. Now, Keenum did play a little better last week. The team as a whole played a little better. They almost beat the New England Patriots before falling 34-31. But we've seen Houston almost win a few games in this 10-game losing streak, and they haven't necessarily responded with a good effort in their next game. I do expect the Jaguars to get a lot of public support here because they are a home underdog, and they do have something going for them that Houston does not, and that is some positive momentum. However, what the Texans have going for them is a better roster. The Texans just have more good players than the Jags. But the same thing was true 2 weeks ago when they played, and the Jags picked up a win out in Houston. Listen, the Texans have cost me more money this year than any team in the league, so it's going to be very tough for me to back them again. But they do still have a good defense. Even after last week's performance when they allowed 34 points in New England, the Texans still rank 3rd in the NFL in total defense. And Jacksonville, even after their best performance of the year last week when they scored 32 on the Cleveland Browns, they still rank 32nd, last in the league in points scored, yards per game, rushing offense. They rank 30th in points allowed. So make no mistake, even though they have been playing better recently, this Jacksonville Jaguar team still does have some major problems, and it would not surprise me to see Houston break their 10-game losing streak on Thursday night in Jacksonville. But again, the Texans have cost me so much money this year that I think I might just hold off and observe that one. And I'll be rooting for the Jags. After all, Jags are our hometown team here in Jacksonville. We are broadcasting here from Jacksonville right now. And it's nice to see some positive energy in town over these last few weeks after, boy, it was so miserable throughout the first half of the season. So we'll see if the Jags can keep it going and pick up a win at home on Thursday night against Houston. Even though I'll be rooting for them, I'm not exactly holding my breath there. Talk about another game, shall we? Now, we always talk about suspicious lines here at BETDAQ NFL. It seems like from time to time, once or twice a week, you see a game where it feels like bettors are almost baited to bet on one side. You see a line and you can predict which way the public money is going to go. And so often in those cases, the other side, the side that is not the obvious side, turns out to be the winning side. Well, there is one obvious candidate for the suspicious line of the week this week. The Kansas City Chiefs traveling to Washington to face the Redskins. The Chiefs only a 3-point favorite on BETDAQ. 44.5 the total in this game. Now, I realize the Chiefs have lost 3 games in a row, but they had won their first 9 games. And their last 3 losses, 2 of their losses have been to the Denver Broncos, the best team in the AFC, and all 3 losses have come by 10 points or fewer. The Washington Redskins are 3-9. They have not won a game in over a month. The Redskins are terrible on both sides of the ball. We know about how bad they are on defense. Currently 31st in the NFL in points allowed. Only Minnesota allowing more points than the Washington Redskins. But lately the Redskins have been just as bad on offense. Their last 3 games they've been held to 17 points or fewer. And the Kansas City Chiefs have had one of the best defenses in the NFL all season. So what gives? The Chiefs have been a much better team than Washington this year, yet only a 3-point favorite on the road in Washington. And it's not like the Redskins have anything to play for other than pride. If you thought they were going to circle the wagons and put forth a good effort at home, You would have probably thought they'd do that last week when they hosted the New York Giants, a worse team than Kansas City. They did not play well in that game, failed to score 20 points against a defense that is, again, worse than what they'll see on Sunday, worse than the Kansas City Chiefs. So how do you have much faith in Washington in this spot? I don't have much faith at all, but I tell you what, this line extremely suspicious. That might scare me off of the game entirely. If it makes any sense, I would feel better about backing the Chiefs here if they were a 6-point favorite than I do about backing them if they're just a 3-point favorite. I know that's the gambler sickness in me talking, but we'll see. We'll see what happens in that game. As I said, frequently, when we see suspicious lines like this, the side that seems like the obvious side does not work out. The Kansas City Chiefs are the obvious side here. I bet you that the public is going to be all over the Chiefs as the week progresses. We'll be keeping our eye on that. We'll be keeping our eye on this game. And if you're going to go just on betting patterns, you might want to close your eyes and make a Washington Redskins bet. This might be the week for it. Let's talk about another one of these games, shall we? Let's start talking about some good teams as opposed to these bad teams. We've been talking about Houston and Jacksonville and Washington. Let's talk about a couple of division leaders. The Indianapolis Colts traveling to Cincinnati this week to face the Bengals. Cincinnati, a 6-point favorite on BETDAQ, 43.5 the total here. Colts lead the AFC South. Bengals lead the AFC North. Both these teams sitting at 8-4. Now, the Colts have not been playing their best football recently. They've won 3 of their last 5 games. All 3 of those wins, though, have come against losing teams. 2 of those wins coming against Tennessee. The other win coming against Houston. In the Houston game and in one of the Tennessee games, they came back. They were behind by double digits in the second half and came back to win those games. Did not play particularly well in those games, and their 2 losses have both been blowouts. They were blown out 38-8 at home by the St. Louis Rams, and then they were beaten 40-11 2 weeks ago by the Arizona Cardinals. Really, since Reggie Wayne, their leading wide receiver, went down, I guess that was 5 weeks ago now, this Indianapolis offense has not been the same. Cincinnati has been playing pretty well. Picked up an impressive road win last week over the San Diego Chargers, won that game 17-10. Bengals hold a 2-game lead in the AFC North over Baltimore. But, I look at this number here, a 6-point number. I think that might be a little big. I think Cincinnati is going to win this game, but the Colts are better than you would think defensively. Over the last 5 weeks, since they've been struggling a little bit, a lot of eyes have been turned towards their offense. And yes, that offense has not been the same since they lost Reggie Wayne. As I said, they can't run the football, so they're still a pass-first offense. And now they don't have a very good receiving core. T.Y. Hilton now their number 1 wide receiver, but not a whole lot of depth in that receiving core. So the Indianapolis offense has not been as good lately, and Cincinnati does play very good defense. The Bengals 5th in the NFL in points allowed. But you look at the other side of the ball. The Colts are better on defense than most people think or than most people give them credit for. Indianapolis currently 12th in the league in points allowed, and Cincinnati does not have a very good offense. The Bengals scored only 17 points last week in their win over San Diego. That is the 7th time this season that Cincinnati has been held to 21 points or fewer. So I see them as a 6-point favorite here. Again, I do expect them to win this game at home, but I don't know. I think the points might come in handy here. 6 feels like a bit much, especially if this line goes up to 7. I do think then the time will be to act. It'll be time to act and get on the Colts. Not sure this line will go up to 7, though. Even with it at 6, a Colts play might be a good idea. Wouldn't be surprised if this was a close game and the Colts might even sneak in there and win it. But even if they don't win it, like I said, wouldn't be surprised if they hung close in this game. And you look at the total here of 43.5. Under 43.5 might be a good way to go, even though, boy, I've had terrible luck betting totals this year. So for the next 3 weeks, whatever comes out of my mouth in terms of a total, it might serve you well to go on the other side because I have not been able to get a total right. Between totals and the Houston Texans, they have cost me a lot of money this year. If I'd have just avoided totals all season and avoided betting on the Texans, boy, it would be a banner year and I would be up thousands, but you know the way those things are. So anyway, I do lean towards under 43.5 in that Indianapolis-Cincinnati game. And something tells me that 6 points might be a little much there. I look for a tight game. Look for the Colts maybe to pull out a cover. Let's talk about some NFC games. The 4 best teams in the NFC are facing off this weekend. So great weekend of football in the NFC. A quasi 4-team playoff, I guess. Let's start with what has now turned into the best rivalry in the NFL. That is, of course, Seattle and San Francisco. This week's version is in San Francisco. The Niners a 2.5-point favorite on BETDAQ, 41 the total in this game. Now, these teams played a few weeks ago, the beginning of the season, Seattle winning 29-3. Actually, Seattle has won the last two meetings between these two teams by 55 combined points. However, both of those games have been in Seattle. San Francisco has won 4 straight in San Francisco. As we said, the Niners a 2.5-point favorite here. Now, you might look at this game on the outset and say, hey, wait a second. We get a chance to back the best team in the NFL as underdogs. Seattle at 11-1, they have the best record in the league, and they're actually getting points here. They're coming off that dominating performance over the New Orleans Saints. Don't know if you saw that last Monday night. Seattle just controlled the game in every phase, beat the Saints 34-7. So I think a lot of people might say, hey, wait a second. Seattle has been clearly better than San Francisco this year. They've won the last two times they faced San Francisco, they've won those two games by 55 combined points. And we had the chance to back them here as an underdog. But boy, I don't know. These two teams very, very similar. Seattle has not been as good on the road over the last couple of years as they've been at home. And as we've said, they've lost their last 4 trips to San Francisco. The Niners playing pretty well now themselves. The last 2 games, they've got their passing game going a little bit. Now, hey, I don't expect them to pass for a whole lot of yards against this Seattle defense. But don't look for Seattle to go up and down the field against this San Francisco defense either. We see a very low total of 41. That total is that low for a reason. I look for a typical game between these two teams, a defensive slugfest. I do not think it's going to be like the earlier game. I believe that was in week 2 when Seattle won 29-3. I think this game is going to be much tighter. And sitting here, and again, we still have several days to analyze this, and I'll probably go back and forth and change my mind a couple of times because that's frequently what I do throughout the course of the week on these games. But sitting here right now, I have a San Francisco lean. Not necessarily a buy low, sell high opportunity because you wouldn't be buying low on the Niners. They've won a couple of games in a row, but certainly maybe a sell high opportunity on the Seattle Seahawks. After watching them dismantle the New Orleans Saints last week, and again, they're 11-1 right now, the best record in the NFL. A lot of people might see them as an underdog and think now is the time to act. Don't know about that. I have an early lean towards San Francisco here. Think they might win this game outright and cover the 2.5. Now the other two best teams in the NFC also facing off. These two teams also division rivals. I'm talking about the Carolina Panthers, who will be visiting the New Orleans Saints on Sunday Night Football. This should be a great game. The Saints a 3.5-point favorite, 45.5 the total here. Just talked about the Saints' performance last week when they went on the road to Seattle and lost 34-7. The Panthers, meanwhile, have won 8 games in a row. They've covered in 6 of those 8 games. Now, we know how good the Saints are at home. 5-0-1 against the spread this year. They pushed their last home game when they were 3-point favorite of the San Francisco 49ers. They did win that game, though. 6-0 outright at home. As a matter of fact, in the Saints' last 28 home games, they have covered 23 of those 28 games, despite being favored in 26 of those 28 games. So that is just incredible. The Saints at home, probably the single best bet in the NFL. However, the Saints' last home loss was to these Carolina Panthers. In Week 17 of last year, Panthers won that game 44-38. Now, both those teams essentially playing for pride at that point. They were both eliminated from playoff contention, and the Saints have been much better this year than they were last year, especially on the defensive side of the ball. New Orleans was 4th in the NFL in points allowed heading into last week, but then they allowed 34 points to the Seattle Seahawks. Now, Carolina does not have a great offense. Specifically, they do not have a great passing offense. The Panthers, one of only 6 NFL teams to average fewer than 200 yards per game. So you say, well, are they going to be able to keep up here? Well, no, they're not going to be able to keep up if the New Orleans offense is able to get into a rhythm and do their usual thing. However, the Panthers, first in the NFL in points allowed, they have the best defense in the league. So are they going to let the New Orleans offense get into their rhythm and do their usual thing? That is the question that is going to decide this game. As we said, the Saints a 3.5-point favorite on BETDAQ. I do have an early New Orleans lean here. Tough for me to turn away from the Saints at home. And even though the Panthers are great defensively, and they are, if they have a weakness, it is the secondary. I hesitate to even call that secondary weakness because they're 6th in the NFL in pass defense. Heading into the season, they were supposed to be a weakness because there's some youth and inexperience back there, but those guys have played very well. Still, the secondary, I guess, a little worse than the front 7. Luke Kuechly's in that front 7, even though Kuechly's all over the field. He's a member of the secondary, member of the front 7. Kuechly, of course, the Panthers' middle linebacker, who might be the best defensive player in all of football. But again, I do have an early New Orleans lean here. I think this is a good buy low, sell high spot. We talked about the Seattle-San Francisco game as not really qualifying as buy low, sell high because you wouldn't really be buying low on the Niners. But after their performance last week in Seattle, this might be as good a buy low chance as we're going to get for the New Orleans Saints. And certainly Carolina riding an 8-game winning streak. Public opinion of the Panthers is as high as it's ever going to be unless they were going to go in and beat New Orleans this week. But again, I don't look for that happening. I do lean towards New Orleans minus 3.5 here, even though it should be an excellent game. I don't put anything past the Panthers. This team has surprised me in their 8-game winning streak. Really looking forward to that one on Sunday Night Football. There you have it. Those are a few games that caught my eye. As I said, we'll be previewing every game in detail here on BETDAQ NFL over the next couple of days, so we do hope you check back with us. Until then, for BETDAQ NFL, I'm John Arnette.